I'm going to give you a little information about Ben. Through 25 years of working in glassblowing, Ben has honed his mastery in glass, traveled across the globe, and worked with hundreds of artists, and that is not an understatement. There are probably thousands of artists. He's an East Coast transplant. He has a BFA from the Rochester Institute of Technology and has been a demonstrating artist at glass studios as far afield as Sweden, the Czech Republic, Italy, and France. He has taught at Penland School of Crafts, Pilchuck Glass School, and many other glass programs around the US. He is definitely a recognized leader in the field and a voice in the glass community, and has contributed to the success of countless works of art. In his own work, Ben draws inspiration from the natural world as well as scientific processes. His work has been exhibited at the Museum of Northwest Art in LaConner, of course here, and dozens of glass galleries around the country. So, Ben, it's a great privilege to hear what you have to say and look at the emerging work and the refinements that you've been doing on your existing. It's a wonderful thing.
Right,
thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Been here for 22 years, so now I get to wear readers every once in a while. I'm not really sure that I have any notes that I need to see, but I'll keep them handy. First of all, big thanks to everybody who works at the Museum of Glass and to the Walker Foundation who sponsored this residency. The Museum of Glass is a nonprofit, and having this wonderful shop down here in the Visiting Artists program and all the other things that we do here at the museum is not cheap, and so we appreciate all the private donations that we have. You know, everybody who comes into our doors to watch every day. That's huge, and there are people out there who believe in the artistic process and fund some of these residencies through a program called Fuel Their Fire, which this week is. So again, big thanks to the Walker Foundation, also to Olympic Color Rods. So Olympic Color Rods is a studio in Seattle. A distributor in Seattle that sells all sorts of glass color and supplies for artists. So they also sponsored my week and made it possible for me to experiment with all the colors and things that I wanted to do down here this week. So a big thank you to them, of course to the Hot Shop team, and of course to my loving family. So without further ado, we'll go through this. Let's see. First slide. This is just a great, I like to show something, first image that kind of speaks to the process of making glass in the hot shop. It's a little bit closer to sport than it is artistic process, but you can see how many folks this takes to make this giant lighting project that we had for a client. Rich Royal, who's standing up on the platform, Levi Belber is suited up, guy in the red shirt I don't know, Sarah Gilbert, Gabe Feenan, and there's Jason Christian jumping down, Darren Dennison, and myself. And I still think there's a few more people that are in this shot, but just to make that one thing, it's a massive lampshade that stands a little taller than 3 feet, and it's probably about 20 inches wide. It's a lot, and so it's a great honor to be able to make glass and work with so many amazing people, and that's a great thing about the Northwest. A lot of talent around. So like Susan said, I'm an East Coast transplant. I grew up in Newport, Rhode Island. Again, just right there on the water. And when I was in high school, one of my teachers knew the guy who owned the studio, Thames Street Glass, and is Matt Beekner. And he used to try and hire high school students because the job paid pretty well. And if you liked it and you fit in with the team, you stayed there for your high school career. And that's how I came to glass. And these little fish that you see up on the upper left hand, I made thousands of those things. And that's how I learned to blow glass. And it's this really, those things are about 4 or 5 inches, and it's a simple bubble with a frit mix, so colored spots on the side, and then you had an assistant that had to bring you all these bits. And it developed great hand skills in order to make them quickly, and we had to make firsts, of course, right? So we're making product for this small studio. But we made thousands of those things, and we used to have these little metal stamps with our initial. So we'd put our initial at the bottom of each one, so that when they went through quality control, you know, if you got better than 75%, you got paid X amount more, like you got a bonus for making firsts. If you made all seconds, well, we didn't lose money, but it wasn't great. So upon learning about art school and pursuing a glass career, I decided that that might be something I was interested in. I had always thought I was going to go into the sciences. I was really interested in marine biology. And as I look back at my family, I realized that it's probably fairly evenly split, with half my folks being in the sciences and sort of half of them being in the arts. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to that. I just figured science came easy to me in school, and that's what I was going to do. Started blowing glass, and one of the guys I was working with had said that, you know, you can go to school for this. And that was odd and interesting, and so I went to art school, which was way outside of my comfort zone, but I had support from my folks to do it, and I felt very lucky to be able to, and that's where I met my wonderful wife. This is our 20-year wedding anniversary. At any rate, RIT is in upstate New York in Rochester, and they have a brand new facility now, but I learned a whole lot more than just how to make glass. I learned a lot about art, history, all sorts of things that go into it, and I felt that that really opened my eyes and allowed me to focus more on what I wanted to do with the material. So another place that helps round out and shape people's careers is the Pilchuck Glass School. It's up in Stanwood, Washington. It's about an hour and a half north of here. And this opened in 1971 with Dale Chihuly and a couple of funders who found this plot of land out in the woods, and it's like art camp for adults. It's kind of wild. And of course, the Museum of Glass. So I'll give you like a little bit of a story about the museum. When we graduated college, I had always worked. I'd always had a job. I didn't like the idea of not having a job. And when I was 12 years old, I had a paper route. I worked in a kitchen. I helped restore boat bottoms. I blew glass. Ended up going to school for glass. When I got out, people were like, well, you can go out to Seattle and bum around and, you know, be a freelance worker and work in different studios. I didn't really like that idea. I liked the idea of, you know, steady, hard work. So one of my professors knew somebody who was hiring out in Sonoma, California. So packed up all my crap, moved to Sonoma, dropped Kyle off at Pilchuck. She took a class, and I worked at this studio called Bacchus Glass. And that was fun for a minute. But while I was in California, there was a couple of instances. There's the California Glass Exchange, which is a biannual conference that happens in different locations within California for all the artists who work with glass. And bumped into somebody there, Eddie Bernard, who was also a RIT graduate. We're having a beer, and he's talking about how he's starting this equipment building company, Wet Dog Glass, and he says, you know, I'm putting in this bid for this job at some place outside of Seattle. This is Tacoma or something, never heard of it, but they're building this glass museum, and if I get this job, it's really gonna be a huge step for my business. I was like, that's cool. And then I had a buddy who I went to school with who called me up and he said, hey, there's this place called the Museum of Glass opening up, and you really ought to consider applying to work there. And I was like, yeah, right. So that was the second time I heard about it, and this is within a few weeks of each other. And then I was in Corning helping to teach a class, and I think it was in January of 2002, and I was having dinner with Tina Oldnow, who was a curator there at the time, and she sat there and she said, what are you doing next year in July? I said, I have no idea. She's like, oh, well, there's this place outside of Seattle, some place called, I think it's Tacoma. They're opening this glass museum. And so I was at the Corning Museum of Glass, which is, I wouldn't say it's our competitor. We're collaborators, right? But they've been around for a while. And so we're talking about it. She's like, get this. They have the balls to call themselves the Museum of Glass. She got a pretty good chuckle out of it. And she was just like, if you can get there, it sounds like it should be pretty cool. It's opening in July of next year. You should go check it out. I said, oh, all right, I'll keep that in mind. So time went by, and I did see an application to apply to be one of the head glass blowers here, and it sat sort of on on our dining room table, and my wife said, "Are you going to apply for that?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, why not?" And I said, "I'm not qualified." And she said, "You should do it anyway." She's like, "Really?" So I gathered up all the materials, and I overnighted this thing to the Museum of Glass because I waited to the last minute, as most artists do, and young men or boys. So I totally waited and nearly missed it, but I made sure that it was registered, and I called here the next day and I said, "I sent you a registered piece of mail. Did you receive it?" And they said, "Oh, yes, we did." So that turned into an interview over the phone, which turned into an interview in person. And I came up here while the place was still being built, had an interview. I believe Susan was in there, as well as a few other people who used to work here, and I got hired. By the time I landed back in Oakland, they had offered me a job. And that's kind of it. For me, that was a huge thing. I didn't know what to do, except I walked in and quit. We packed up all our crap again, and we drove up to Seattle. And that was 22 years ago. So, since then, I'll show you a little bit about our lives. We like to bum around the outdoors. This is out in Wyoming, out in the hinterland. Bryce Canyon. Any chance we get to be outdoors, we do. And this kind of goes into like what influences my work, and mostly from palette, not always from form, but just being in nature. We like to collect mushrooms. These are not ones that you should eat, except for the one on the upper right. I haven't because it disagrees with most people, but not all. Like to spend, again, growing up in Newport, Rhode Island. My stepfather was a commercial fisherman. My dad was a social worker and avid sports fisherman, so I spent a lot of time in the water, in the water and on the water fishing. So spend countless hours on shorelines looking at the flora and fauna that exist underneath. I always loved the sort of the striated leaves on the ginkgos, and then this upper image is a trillium, in the lower, I don't know the name of that one, but it's another mountain flower, and these are sort of indicators of when you can go out mushrooming for certain species of mushroom that we like to go and collect and actually eat. So, one more team shot. Again, this is just a great image of us working for visiting artist, Gay Outlaw. She's in the background wondering what we're doing. She doesn't work with glass, but she's wondering what we're all doing, and we're all have one aspect of this process, right? So Alex Stisser's dropping the color, Gabe's holding the pipe, and I'm cutting the color. And this is just kind of goes in to show that everybody has a hand in what's being made down here. So it's about 2004 or 2005 as an artist or a maker that I really felt like I made something that I wanted to show. And so that was about the time I had my first exhibition. And these were the first in the series of pieces I title Stomachs. We'll get back to that a little bit. I like to show this because you can kind of get an idea of the sense of proportion and scale here. Maybe not scale, but proportion for sure. Here's some more inspiration. Cool piece of fennel. Some more works. So now you can see the development and sort of the stretching out of the proportion of the stomachs on the right. This is pleated lobe and stomach. Being out here on the West Coast, again, like to go out fishing. So there'll be some fish pics in here a little bit. I never knew that albacore tuna ran up this far, but we've been out several times. Gabe is an avid fisherman as well, and we spent a lot of time chasing tuna around. So it's a great way to get fresh fish, and you think it's going to pay for itself, but it probably doesn't. But it's really good. So here's some more. These are visceral lobes, and the guy down below is it's a liver that I cut out of a fish when I was cleaning it on the East Coast. Blurry photo, but I love sort of, you can kind of see all the veins running through it. Being in glass has allowed me to travel all over the world, and one of those places I've been is the south of France, to Biot. And while we were there, they have this wonderful open-air market in a town called Antibes, and they had all this fresh produce, but you could see sort of the relation between these garlics and lobated sinew here on the right, my right, still your right. So I was always interested in the sciences. So my mom was a lab tech, and I used to root around in the attic when I was a kid, and I came across these little slides, and I always tried to look at them can't see anything. It's weird. But they were pink, and I thought that was cool. And so I started getting interested in sort of the microcosm of what you would see on this little piece of glass. And these were our first investigation into making these glass slides. These are prints. I wasn't much of a printmaker, but the process is similar. It's very a process-driven art form, and I took to it very quickly. So this was a lot of fun, got controlling with it very quickly, but I tried to sort of replicate sort of made-up microscopic imagery. Some more inspiration. This is a visceral pod. The other thing I like to do is we tie flies. You know, I haven't done much of that lately, but used to make these little flies to go around on the Olympic Peninsula and chase these guys. So steelhead and salmon in the rivers. I don't really mess with salmon in the rivers, but steelhead, they're fair game. A lot of catch and release unless they're hatchery, and those are meant to be taken out. But these guys here, the fish that I'm holding in the water, that's my fish of a lifetime out in the Hoh River. And it was a pretty special time wandering around the woods and you know, spending a lot of time talking and fishing and not much catching. So Alex Dister here on the left, myself and Gabe, we were the original sort of glass blowers hired here at the museum. And at some point, something had to change. So Alex came from a 6th-generation family farm in Galva, Illinois. And I think it was 2010, he got the call and said, "Son, time to come home. Stop playing with the glass." So he always loved farming, and he always sort of went back for planting in the spring and harvest in the fall. And so it was a hard choice for him, but he moved his family back to Galva, Illinois, where he's taken over the family farm, turned a part of it to an organic farm, and is doing really well. Still misses us. We talk fairly regularly, and he blows glass every once in a while, but he's doing well. So that left room for us to hire somebody. And if we go back a few years to 2006, Sarah Gilbert was hired as our tech. So we had a few other folks that were on staff here. The tech position is so important. They help keep the shop running, the furnaces full, and to sort of fix things that get broken and make new things that we need to use. So Sarah Gilbert was in Pennsylvania at the time, working at University of the Arts, I think. She can neither confirm or deny. So she was the first person I hired in my role as sort of the manager of the hot shop. And that was great because she's still here, and she's moved up in the ranks. We'll get to that in a little bit. When Alex left, we had this hole to fill, and we're like, what are we going to do? And so we put out a call to the glass community, and we hired the guy on the far right, which is Niko Dimitrovic, and he came to us from Detroit, and he worked here for about 5 years until 2015 when he thought it was time for him to go and do new things. The woman next to Niko is Heather Cornelius, so a local potter and artist, and she was our MC at the time. So we always try to take these photos either with each other but with the visiting artist to sort of document time and place. And this is a good one. This was sort of a change. So back to some more glass. You can see these beautiful heirloom tomatoes next to, and sort of you might see the, you know, sort of the color influence on the visceral lozenge. 2014, I had the opportunity to have a small exhibition at the Museum of Northwest Art, and I was like, okay. I always like these scientific diagrams, so I wanted to take some of my forms and build an abstract diagram of your guts. And so there's a lung, a stomach, and sort of this lobe form, which is meant to maybe reference a liver. These are all mirrored, and then the surface is knocked down, so you get up kind of close to them, and you have this very distorted reflection of yourself. The piece was titled Introspection. This is gathering, using glass in the color mirror to try and reference precious metals. Growth ring, the idea that you can age a tree with rings, and the growth rings on the interior, as well as for humans, the size of your femur dictates your age. So coming back around to exploring the idea of microscopic slides, it's like I made those prints, and I always wanted to make them in glass. I didn't know how. So this whole time from 1993 till 2014, that time was spent gaining enough skill and understanding of how to do things. I'm a process-driven person, problem solver. I want to learn how to make just about anything so that when I have an idea, I can express it how I want. So these are large-scale slides, 8 by 24. So a typical microscope slide is 1 by 3. So scaled it up a bit, and I will show you some process shots of how these are made here shortly. But there's a bunch of little inclusions that were put into the glass, canes, stripes, all these different colors, and they were blown into these large-scale cylinders. This is out in Penland in 2014. I had a residency in the winter working with Che Rhodes, and this is how they started. This cylinder here is actually that first tan image. So pick up all the things, make a giant cylinder out of it, and when it's cold, we cut the bottom off of it, then we cut a slice down the side in the cold shop. Clean it up a little bit, stick it back in the annealer, and we heat it up to about 1200 degrees, and then we can lay it open flat. So we're slumping it back open flat into this big panel, at which point I can then cut out of it what I want. So it takes a lot of time, a lot of process. It's a lot of fun, I suppose. These are still in a crate in my basement. Which also leads me to this next image, and this is 2018. So, 4 or 5 years later, exploring other ideas, I see my practice as an artist. It's sort of split in two, where we're making these sculptural objects, which are great fun to make. They're challenging. To me and to some other people, they're beautiful objects, and maybe they're not quite as conceptually driven. But then the other part of my practice is sort of thinking about the environment and making things that sort of reflect that. So this piece is a Puget Sound shell, which was in an exhibition at the Bellevue Arts Museum. And so this work is not always like the most commercially viable, but it costs a lot to make. So I had the opportunity to be a part of a group exhibition there. And when I first moved out here, we used to, in the past 22 years, I've seen a decline in salmon runs. I've seen more warm water events that prohibit the gathering of shellfish because of biotoxins that are found in algae. And that's what this piece is about. So all the cast shellfish in the box below, these are all native shellfish to the Northwest. And I chose them to talk about the idea that each one of these hold biotoxins for a certain period of time. So after you have an algae bloom, you can't eat the varnish clam, but you might be able to eat the Pacific oyster. And there's some that just hold biotoxins forever, so you can't even harvest those anymore. And I found that interesting. And then the slide imagery is based on all the little microorganisms that you. So here's some more process shots about some of the sculptural things that we're making on the floor this week. You'll see on the left side of the screen these canes or these stripes that are made by hand. So we pick up color, we stretch it out, we stretch it again, then we pick up those rods in these patterns. You can see what was laid out on the plate. We roll that up and we turn it into this cup. That cup is then stuffed with some color and turned into this, which is banded cottonwood. So here's some more banded ruby stomach. These are some stones, direct reference of river stones and such. The patterns sort of come out of what I see in leaves and plants. Trying to join the two thoughts of the more project-oriented work and sculptural work. This is a stitched mussel, not muscle in your body, but the shellfish. So I'm really fond of this thing. Everything went wrong, but we still made a really great thing. And I made this for a class out in Penland. So we went through a bunch of hard times during the pandemic, but coming out of that, there's a project that I hope you all get to see that's up right now in the gallery, and it's the Salmon School started by Joseph Gregory Rosano. So Joe and I have known each other since 2004, and he's from New York. I'm from Rhode Island, and we got on pretty good. He's sort of an acquired taste. He rubs people the wrong way, but for some reason we got on pretty good. And he's an avid fly fisherman. He showed me a lot of the ways about chasing steelhead out here, and we continue to fish together and talk about art and sculpture. In 2018, this conversation about the plight of Pacific salmon started, and it was based on the Skagit River, which is the 4th largest outflow into the Pacific. And in the early 2000s, they had their lowest return of salmon, which was 2,504 fish. So the Skagit River typically historically held tens, if not hundreds of thousands of fish that would return every year that the indigenous people depended on as a food source. And the run timing was different. So they showed up, in the spring, in the fall, and then you would get a run of steelhead that would show up in the winter. So there was constant food source in the river. That's no longer the case. And the goal here was to make 2,504 fish. We would silver them so that they reflected the environment around them, and then we would hang them in a confined space, like a baseball court, to sort of give everybody to show everybody how little that is. So this is actually up in our galleries here at the museum. But in 2021, we were given the opportunity to hang this at the UN Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. So coming out of the pandemic, we scrambled. We boxed all these things up. We got them sent over there. We had all of our paperwork. We had to do all these COVID tests every day. We're working in the secured space, and we had to hang this from a grid that was going to be above people's heads, which was nerve-wracking because this is going to be all different dignitaries and leaders of the world standing underneath this thing. So it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and it was pretty incredible. But there's the next slide is a short video. Hopefully it's not too loud. But so you can see that little bounce there at the end, which is super nerve-wracking. So all these fish I believe they had 4 cables running through them, so sort of a fail-safe in case anything fell. Hopefully there was a redundancy that would catch it. Very cool project, and much like the salmon, the idea that it's coming back to its native waters here in Tacoma is very fitting. So that project traveled around Scotland to 3 or 4 different locations. Now it's back here in the Northwest, and there's potential that it'll go other places. So if you haven't given it a walkthrough, please go check it out. Here's some more units. This is striated lozenge. These are some mussels, red squiggle mussel. A group of them coming up. There we are. Here's another stone. Silver pod. You get sort of enamored by the silvered surface. It's a pain in the butt to work with, but it has a great effect on handmade glass and what you can do with it. A few stones. So again, source imagery, walking down the street, we were somewhere over in the stadium district and saw this leaf that just grew this way, and they all were this shape. I don't know I forgot to look at what kind of tree this was, but that was a pretty incredible image. Banded blue seed. And then a few years ago, I was a visiting artist at Pilchuck, and I made this piece for a class for my buddy James Devereaux. And most of the things that are down here are on the, they're not super thin, but they're not super heavy either. And then I wanted to always make this thing that had this, you guys can see the thin band of glass, we call it ice, that runs around the outside of the piece. So this piece is about 1.5 inches wide, right, by 14 inches, well, 1.5 inches deep by 14 inches wide and 15, 16 inches tall. But to get it, to make glass round, gather it all up, blow it, shape it, and then squish it that flat was challenging. Also to get it sort of this nice, even layer of crystal on the outside is something that I became enamored with and wanted to sort of chase. So these are the most recent pieces. I made these last fall. This one was in sometime this winter. And these next two were sort of my favorite things. as of late. And you can kind of see that bit of that glassy quality around the edge and all these, painterly lines on the inside meant to reference either muscle tissue or sinew. And these big windows in there offer you an image or an ability to look into and through the piece. So that's my work, and these are the folks that make it happen. So again, so very lucky to work in such a great team. So left to right, Sarah Gilbert, Nick Davis standing up. Nick is our current tech. Sarah's working with us here on the hot shop floor. Kristen Elliott with a beverage in her hand. She's our cold worker. She's having car issues today. I don't know if she's back, but she's a great addition to our team here. Myself, my wife, Kala, and Gabe Feenan. So a big thank you to everybody who's in this picture, everybody who's not in this picture who's helped me along the way, but it's an absolute pleasure and honor to work with this crew. And that's what I got for you. Thank you. Do you have any questions? Sure, there's a question of how I get the clear windows into my pieces. It's a great question. It's a little techie, but, and I'm gonna answer you with a story. So as an artist, when you're in art school and you get out of art school, or if you don't go to art school, you're always looking for something that's your own. And if you want to make a living as an artist, you need to make something that's recognizable as your own, right? So everybody knows what Dale Chihuly's work looks like because he started down this path. He has this vision. It's unique, but it's also very unique to him. So that's a thing, whether you're a painter or a poet, you're trying to make something that people recognize that belongs to you. So while we were in school, we were hanging out in the studio one night, and it was really just like mess around and find out, like what happens if you drill into glass. So we were drilling holes through a bubble and then gathering over and blowing them up. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a little bit more refined in that we have a cordless drill over here. And in its chuck is a tungsten welding rod that's sharpened. So at a certain point, after we've added all the color, I just drill a hole through it, and I gather over it, and I blow it up very carefully, and it creates these big clear windows. And I mess it up a lot, but when I get it right, it looks pretty good. So. The question was, how do you prevent the glass from going inside? Magic. I can't tell you that part. It's a secret. No, it's actually, the glass isn't that viscous. It's not like water. It's a little bit more like honey. So there's a certain amount of surface tension in the hot glass. So when you stick the bubble in there and turn it, it's not going to go into that hole. Mind you that the hole is just shy of a 1/4 inch. It's tiny when it starts. Yeah, you're welcome. What else? Here. That's a great question. Question about what I was making today, and it's a pretty big departure. It is. And I think, we've made we've made probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of objects here at the museum for other people. And when we're working, there's all these things that you can do, right? We've sort of garnered this reputation to be sort of some of the best makers around. We can, people are like, oh, you can make anything. It's like, no, I don't know. I feel sheepish about that statement, but I think when you have seen and made so many different things, there's a lot of those parts and pieces that influence you. I did want to make something that looked completely different than what I've been doing. And I really did like the idea of these flat forms. And oddly enough, sort of a influence for these works is a woman by the name of Laura De Santiana. And so she's an Italian artist who has since passed a handful of years ago. And we actually worked with her a bunch over the years. And I remember when I was a kid, because I'm going to have to talk about this in a couple of days, but when I was a teenager, I came across this, book of Italian glass works, and it had all these fancy things in it. Most of them were round and, you know, had all these stripes, and they were very typical Venetian glass. And then I turned the page and I came across this thing that was this big black square. I was like, whoa. And it was shocking. I don't know, it was this beautiful object. It was a little bit weird, but it was very different than anything else in there. And this, and she was actually a visiting artist here. We got to talking and making all these things with her. So that form, that sort of square format, I think I couldn't say, you know, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't influenced by that. But I guess in this case, and they're completely solid. It's a blown bubble that we squeeze all the air out and then make it square. These ones I wanted to be a little bit puffy, sort of like a bag. And another reference for it is our plastic bags. And I guess the little hole on the side. So these were the first ones that we made. And the idea, again, which is where we got to today, is to have a color on the inside, sort of an opaque color, a transparent color on the outside that would disrupt the true color of the interior. And then when I put that hole in it to now make it functional, if you guys wanted to put a flower in it, you could. But I really see it more as a sculptural object. That would show you the true color of the interior. So you have this moment of, you know, the last one, it'll be sort of goldy orange. And then as your eye travels up, you'll get this bright red spot of the color of the interior. That's pretty much the inspiration. So it's a little bit more design oriented maybe. And yeah. Yes, a technical challenge. And I think, again, that's where my mind goes, is sort of process-driven things on occasion, or all the time. Yeah. Anything else out there? All right, thanks for being here, and happy Father's Day to all the dads and moms and everybody out there.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Cobb. I'm the hot shop director and one of the glass blowers here at the Museum of Glass. Originally, I'm from Newport, Rhode Island, and I've been living in Washington State for 22 years. Yeah, I would describe myself as a maker or an artist. I pursued glass making in art school as a material, and then I was always interested in the process of glass blowing, the pursuit of sort of technical excellence, sort of a lifetime learner, if you will, and a problem solver. So I like to have all these techniques sort of packed away in my brain so that as I think about what I want to make, I might be able to pull from that to realize my ideas. I spend a lot of time outdoors with my family. We spend a lot of time on the water, fishing, hiking, camping. So a lot of time to take in sort of the natural wonders, as it were, and be inspired by them. Very lucky to have Olympic Color Rods sponsor me this week, and use this time here at the Museum of Glass to experiment with those. And one of the things I've been wanting to try for a while is layering up three colors. The pieces that we were working on today it's sort of a general leaf shape with a bunch of lines in them to sort of represent sort of that visceral systems that you see in the leaf. I'm not trying to recreate those things, just inspired by it. The microcosm of things that are around you and sort of blowing them up to draw attention to those details. When I first started showing work, I made a variety of things that were sort of based on human anatomy. So I came up with this idea. I started making these forms that were sort of these abstract stomachs. They're very slick, modern-looking pieces. When I first started sort of making these, it was two colors, right? So a transparent over an opaque, and you get this hyper-saturated surface. But that would just make the interior that one opaque color, which was typically, in this case, it was blue. So I want to figure out how to add something more in there. So the interior of this thing is this bright yellow, and then there's an opaque blue, and then there's a transparent blue. That modern form is kind of stuck on a pedestal. Somebody might see it across the room and walk over to it and be like, wow, that's really cool. And they read the title card at the base of the pedestal, and you can see their sort of demeanor change when they read the word stomach. They would get like, ooh, they kind of cringed. And I don't know, that was almost more interesting to me than the actual work. I don't know if creative control is not the right word, but I have a lot of input on the creative direction of the museum, from developing the Visiting Arts program, working with curatorial closely. Having a full-time job sometimes limits your focus on your personal work. So I think over the past 22 years, this might be my third residency here. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but we facilitate other people's ideas. That's what we do. We facilitate other people's dreams coming true here in the hot shop. And to be able to have those 5 days to focus on my own work is awesome. It's incredible. The folks that are on the floor with me, Kristen Elliott, Gabe Feenan, Sarah Gilbert, Nick Davis. This week, also Sayuri Fukuda has come down to help. There's a few others that are coming up this weekend. I mean, it's awesome. And they're all here to help me realize my ideas. And that's so special.